Hello there, humans. You may think this is an old video, but it's not. I moved inside today because it rained outside yesterday and it's really wet out there on the patio, so I don't want to sit in the water and do my video. So, what I wanted to talk to you about is what I talked about at the Angel City Zen Center the last time I spoke there, which was last Saturday. And it's about two different sort of approaches to describing life and death and what all of that means. I've been reading this book by Thich Nhat Hanh called Understanding Our Mind, and I've mentioned that on this channel. And he has a chapter in there called Birth and Death, and I'm going to give you the way he explains birth and death in that chapter. He explains a lot more than what I'm about to give you, but this is kind of an excerpt. And he is talking about Yogacara or Vijnanavada, mind-only Buddhism teachings, which is not exactly Zen, but it kind of informs Zen, and that's what I want to kind of talk about, and here goes. So here's what Thich Nhat Hanh says. According to the manifestation only, that's Yogacara or Vijnanavada, that's what he decided to call it, as manifestation only, because he doesn't like mind only or consciousness only. And according to those teachings, birth simply means manifestation, the appearance of a phenomenon. Death means the absence of manifestation or appearance. Birth and death come about based on conditions. When conditions are favorable, there is birth, manifestation, and there is death, the absence of manifestation. When we look deeply and recognize the causes and conditions that allow birth and death to be, we realize that birth and death are only notions. The manifestation of something is not the beginning of its existence, and when something is not manifesting, this does not mean it does not exist. Before a phenomenon manifests, it is already there in the conditions. Birth is made of death, and death is made of birth. Birth and death occur simultaneously in each moment. Before you were born, you were already there. When you die, you do not become nothing. You go back to the wholeness, to the base, in order to manifest again. When the snail has retracted its antennae, it would not be correct to say the antennae do not exist. After we walk away and the snail puts out its antennae again, it would not be correct to say they have only at that moment come into existence. In the same way, when consciousness manifests, it is not at that moment born. When it does not manifest, it does not at that moment die. When consciousness manifests, there is differentiation and discrimination, vikalpa. Discrimination says, this is self and that is other than self. It is the sword that cuts and divides what is self from what is not self. But discrimination is not the truth. It is an imaginary construction, a fabrication of the mind. The nature of consciousness is to manifest perception in which subject and object support each other and make the perceiver and the perceived possible. Consciousness manifests as rivers, mountains, stars, and sky. When we look at the rivers, mountains, stars, and sky, we can see thinking in the deep blue waters and perception in the stars. This is true because all these phenomena are manifestations of consciousness, objects of perception, both collective and individual. What we believe to be an objective reality is first of all the object of our perception. Consciousness does not manifest only as the subject of perception, the perceiver. When there is manifestation of consciousness, it is at the same time both aspects of perception, perceiver, and perceived. That's what Thich Nhat Hanh says. Now, those of you who've been following this video channel for a while will remember, it wasn't that long ago, I think it was just a few days ago, where I quoted Yuibutsu Yobutsu, and Dogen says something quite similar to what Thich Nhat Hanh just said. And Thich Nhat Hanh, I don't know if Thich Nhat Hanh's read Dogen, but I know he's from a stream that doesn't consider Dogen to be one of the significant Zen masters. He's from a more Rinzai influenced stream, so we can't assume that he's influenced by Dogen when he says what he says. But this is what Dogen says. He quotes an ancient Zen master who says, "Mountains, rivers, the earth, and human beings are born together. The Buddhas of the three times, past, present, and future, and human beings have always practiced together." Then Dogen says, "Thus, if we look at the mountains, rivers, and earth while one human being is being born, we do not see this human being now appearing through isolated superimposition upon mountains, rivers, and the earth that existed before this human being was born. That's an interesting translation, and I gave you some other translations last week. Somebody after I put that up gave me a translation by Edo Shimano and Charles Vasher. Edo Shimano, there was a lot of stuff about him. He died a few years ago. It was not so nice, but that doesn't mean he's a bad translator of Dogen, and I think this is an interesting translation, so I'm going to give you his version too. Mountains, rivers, and earth, and all of us were born at the same time. The Buddhas of the three worlds and all of us practice together. Being so, do not disdain these words, even if when a person is born, new mountains, rivers, and earth do not heap upon existing mountains, rivers, and earth. So that was his version, and I think that that's probably a good middle way between all the weird conflicting versions that I gave you last week if you were paying attention. But I wanted to talk about something else too, because there's a whole other way of saying this. Now, you'll notice right there, I hope you notice, my point is to make you notice, that the version that Thich Nhat Hanh gave you seems pretty straightforward. It's to me at least, it seems pretty easy to understand. You're like, okay, this is what happens, and that's what happens, and that's why it happens. And then Dogen gets kind of poetic. Well, let's see him get even more poetic, because here is a koan that is not written by Dogen, but is one of the ones he collected and one of the ones he used in his teachings. And I always like this one, because this is sort of birth and death. Ryo, the Zasu temple master on Mount Sei in the Ko district, became a disciple of Master Baso, who is Master Matsu, if you want to, or Baso is, no, Matsu. Anyway, Baso is a different name in Chinese, and I'm not going to go look it up, but, that's it. Master Baso said, "Which sutra do you lecture on?" Ryo said, "The Heart Sutra." He was like an expert in the Heart Sutra. And to get the joke that he's going to do right here after this, you have to know that heart and mind are the same character in Chinese. So just keep that in mind. Master Baso said, "How do you lecture on it?" Ryo said, "I lecture on it with my mind. I lecture on it with my shin, with my kokoro, with my heart mind." Master Baso said, "Mind is the leading actor, will is a supporting player, and the six senses are the followers. So how can you lecture on the sutra?" Ryo said, "If it is impossible for mind to lecture on the sutra, then do you say that just empty space can lecture on it? Do you say form and emptiness? If form can't lecture on it, can emptiness lecture on it?" Something like that. Master Baso said, "Even space, even emptiness can lecture on it." Ryo started to leave, swinging his sleeves widely, like he won the debate. Master Baso called out to him. He said, "Kansu!" I'm not sure. I think kansu is just kind of like, hey. Ryo turned his head. Somebody opened the garage. Master Baso said, "From birth to death, it's just like this." I remember Tim saying that to me once and going, "From birth to death, it's just like this." And I'm going, I'm just like this little teenager going, what's this all about? So Master Ryo realized the truth and concealed himself on Mount Sei. Nobody knows what happened to him after that. So that's a very poetic way, and now we're going to get into another version of what is birth and death that I liked. This is from a Dharma Hall discourse recorded in Eihei Koroku. It's number 267, in case you want to go look it up. "I can remember once Officer Liu requested Nonquan. I asked the teacher to expound the Dharma for the sake of the assembly. Nonquan said, 'What do you want this old man to expound? What do you want me to tell you?' The officer said, 'Master, don't you have some skillful means for teaching?' Nonquan said, 'What are those in the assembly lacking?' The officer said, 'What will you do about those in the 4 births and the 6 realms?' 4 births is like 4 moisture, transformation, womb. Anyway, it's 4 ways of being born in traditional Buddhism. And the 6 realms are like heaven realms, hell realms, and human realms, and animal realms. There's 6 of them, trust me. Nonquan said, 'This old monk does not teach them.' The officer had no response. Now here's Dogen's little response on that. That mountain barbarian did not leave Mount Nonquan for more than 30 years. The demon spirits finally had an opportunity to observe Nonquan, which is a reference to an old story, and it doesn't matter, but there's a story about demons looking at Nonquan, and just, who cares? Although this was the story, if it were I, Eihei, if it were me, and someone were to request me to expound the Dharma for the sake of the assembly, this is what I would say to him. I have been expounding it for a long time. Suppose he were to ask, what will you do about those in the 4 births and 6 realms? I would say to him, fortunately, right here I am able to have a bowel movement. Why would I be involved in those in the 4 births and the 6 realms? That's one way of saying it. And now, last one I want to give you in the reading section of today's thing. This is from an essay called Shoji, which means birth and death, and it's usually the last last essay that appears in any edition of Shobo Genzo in contemporary times. And nobody knows when Dogen wrote it because he didn't put a date on it. To understand that we move from birth to death is a mistake. Birth is a state at one moment. It already has a past and will have a future. For this reason, it is said in the Buddha Dharma that appearance is non-appearance. Extinction, death, is also a state at one moment. It too has a past and a future. This is why it is said that disappearance is just non-disappearance. In the time called life, there is nothing besides life. In the time called death, there is nothing besides death. Thus, when life comes, it is just life. When death comes, it is just death. Do not say, confronting them, that you will serve them, and do not wish for them. When we let go of our own body and our own mind and throw them into the house of Buddha, they are set into action from the side of Buddha. Then, when we continue to obey this, without exerting any force and without expending any mind, we get free from life and death and become Buddha. Who would wish to linger in mind? It is very easy to become Buddha. Not committing wrongs, being without attachment to life and death, showing deep compassion for all living beings, venerating those above and having compassion for those below, being free of the mind that dislikes the 10,000 things and free of the mind that desires them, the mind being without thought and without grief, this is called Buddha. Look for nothing else. The end. And I gave you almost the entire bit because it's very short. So I have a bunch more quotes, but I'm not going to give them to you because I've already gone on too long. But the thing that strikes me is there are different ways to express this stuff. And when it comes to the great matter of life and death, that's the one everybody wants to know about. You know, what is this life and what happens after we die? And everybody's like, oh, I'm so excited to hear that. Let's hear it. So on the one hand, you've got a person like Thich Nhat Hanh who gives you a very straight sort of answer. You know, this is what happens, this is what consciousness is, this is what mind is. Life is, what does he say? He says, you know, it's all just an appearance and it's a manifestation of mind. The material world is just a manifestation of mind, and what you see in front of you is not reality. And actually the book goes into super great detail about all that stuff. And then you get to somebody like Dogen who says, from birth to death, it's just like this. You know, that's kind of, to me, in a nutshell, the whole thing. And then he does say a little bit more when he does that life and death thing that I just read you. But it's still kind of poetic and weird, you know, appearance and non-appearance. To understand that we move from birth to death is a mistake, and all this. This is actually more straightforward than a lot of Dogen, but it's still kind of poetic and weird. And the question is, like, how much of this do you need to know? And I think the thinking in the Zen tradition is that any sort of explanation you give about anything, especially something like the matter of life and death, is going to be mistaken because words cannot encompass it. Words try to discriminate and divide and make this as a contrast to that, and every word has a front and a back. So this is why people who are searching for pleasure don't understand that they're also searching for pain, because pain is on the back of pleasure, and every word is just a definition that contrasts it with other things that are not it. So every definition contains its own opposite. I'm probably sounding really bizarre to you. And that's what the Zen people have figured out, and they just go, well, we're not gonna talk about that. We'll just say it in poetic terms, or we'll just slap you on the face. You know, there's a lot of koans that work out like that. The guy just gets slapped and then goes, well, I don't know what happened, and he's supposed to understand it that way. So that's just how we talk about things, and it's really weird, and I thought I'd present it to you and give you some nice quotes that I thought were interesting, and I hope you were entertained. If you want to contribute to me being able to make more confusing entertainment like this, you can send a donation to the address you're seeing on the screen below. That is my only way of making a living, and I really appreciate your support. But if you're having financial trouble, don't donate to me. Please don't, because it's not desperate, and I'm not clawing at the dirt right now. But the reason I'm not clawing at the dirt right now is because a lot of you folks do continue to support me, so I thank you very much for that. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye.